Concept 1, define and discuss the successful cash crop, cheap land, and cheap labor as it developed in Virginia. So in order for Virginia's plantation system to develop, three things were necessary: the successful cash crop, free land, and cheap labor. The successful cash crop, obviously, is tobacco, and it was immediately successful after its first planting in 1612. It received 60 pence or 5 shillings a pound from the get-go, and so which was been quite a bit of money for these people in this given time and place. And so, given the amount of profit that was available and continued to be profitable for the foreseeable future, a lot of people got into this quickly. And so it was decided from the get-go tobacco would become the chief staple, simply because of the successful attempts by John Rolfe and others to produce a satisfactory smoking leaf. There was a ready market for the tobacco all over Europe, and per pound it brought more income than wheat or timber combined. Another reason was the fact that tobacco was indigenous to the soil and climate of Virginia. However, the tobacco grown by Native Americans in Virginia was too harsh for European tastes. What Rolfe did, Rolfe's tobacco was a different species that was produced in Latin America. Plus, tobacco had a greater advantage over all other staples because it could be produced in larger quantities per acre. This was important considering the labor requirements to clear the trees and prepare the land for cultivation. It was the labor demands were incredibly great. It was soon discovered that the amount of tobacco produced by one man's labor earned as much as the work of 6 men in a wheat field. A tobacco planter did not have to clear much land. On average, one man could farm between 1.5 to 2 acres of tobacco plus provisions. A good yield of tobacco production was 1,000 pounds per acre. Moreover, tobacco could be shipped more economically than any other crop. Thus, the profit margin for tobacco was greater than any other crop that could be produced in the colony. With the above-mentioned economic benefits, it's no wonder that Virginia became a one-crop society, producing close to 400 pounds of tobacco for every man, woman, and child in the colony by the 1600s, by the late 1600s. The free land came about under the headright system, which was first introduced in Virginia in 1618. The headright system was the principal means for acquiring land in Virginia, as well as other southern colonies during the 17th century, the 1600s. A headright was originally 50 acres and developed from the idea that anyone who paid his own way to Virginia should have a share in the Virginia Company. In this instance, a share represented by land. The colonists would also receive 50 acres for every member of his family over 15, and 50 acres for each servant he brought over. But the system was soon tainted by corruption. Colonial officials failed to check closely, and even the names of tombstones were known to have been presented for headrights. As a result, many large landholdings developed in Virginia. From 1628 to 1632, the headright patents averaged from 100 to 300 acres. But between 1650 to 1670, they averaged 674 acres. To seat a claim and receive title to the property, the holder of the headright had to make out its boundaries, plant a crop, and construct some sort of habitation. Generally, the grantor of a headright demanded a small annual payment called a quit rent. A quit rent was not a rent at all, for the person who paid it was not a tenant. It was a tax, really, paid in recognition to the grantor, and was a practice that had been used in medieval Europe. In Virginia, the quit rent was 1 shilling for every 50 acres, and provided a way for the grantor of the headright to derive income from his colony. The amount of quit rent varied from colony to colony and was generally resented and hard to collect. The cheap labor was first introduced with the development of the indentured servants. Indentured servants were men and women who performed any sort of labor for the master for a period of 4 to up to 7 years. The headright system encouraged landless Europeans to migrate to the colonies. More often than not, those wanting to come over could not afford passage across the Atlantic. In order to solve this problem, the indentured servant system was developed. After a servant completed their years of labor in exchange for their transportation to the New World, they would become free, theoretically. Usually the ex-servant was entitled to an outfit, which would be a suit of clothes, some farm tools, seed, and perhaps a gun. At the same time, the former servant received farmland in the usual way, 50 acres for himself or herself, and 50 acres each for any spouse or grown children. Custom varied from colony to colony and according to the bargain struck by the two parties when the indenture first signed. And so that was basically the theory of indentured servitude. For a lot of these folks, though, it was pretty miserable conditions working in this. A lot of them would die in the process of trying to serve out their servitude and contracting in the early years of Virginia. The first 20 Africans came to Virginia in 1619 as indentured servants, it's believed. They were brought over by a Dutch sea captain. They were an insignificant element in society at the time, obviously only 20 people, but would become a very important as a solution to further labor problems of Virginia within the next 50 years. The first statutes to deal with slavery were local and did not appear until the 1660s. The medieval serfdom that had tied English peasants to the land or a master had long since died out. English common law acknowledged various degrees of unfree status, such as indentured servitude, but it made no provision for lifetime or hereditary bondage. The concept of chattel slavery, that is, ownership of a human being by another, was alien to English law at the time. However, it is certain that by about 1640, some blacks were slaves, and it appears that the practice grew and finally became legalized locally by the 1660s and colonial-wide by 1670. So that would deal with the labor aspect, right? So the labor aspect, it's important to understand early Virginia history, indentured servitude, right? With hints of a gradual emergence of African race-based slavery. Black slavery is beginning. And it's important to understand that it was quite gradual. English people, when they first settled, they envisioned Virginia to be a place for English society and English people, not for a place for other people to come into, right? And so they were weary about bringing in Africans. They didn't want to do what the Spanish and the Portuguese had done. They wanted to keep what in terms that they would use back then, to keep their blood pure, right? All right. Well, that conducts concept 1. I'll be talking to you guys with concept 2. Let me know if you have any questions about this concept. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.